You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet. Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is brought to you by our brilliant sponsor X-Deep and by the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. Huge thanks to both for their support that makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Now, it's super cool to bring you this episode with renowned cave explorer Robbie Schmittner. Robbie has spent the last 25 years exploring the caves of the Yucatan Peninsula and has mapped literally hundreds of kilometers of flooded passage. Along the way, he's been responsible for connecting cave systems that have become the largest explored cave systems in the world. This experience has given Robbie a unique perspective on cave exploration and a deep understanding of the caves of the Yucatan and how they are formed. In this episode, Robbie gives us some background on how he came to Mexico, and then we discuss his early days cave diving, including his time with cave legend Bil Phillips. We discuss many of Robbie's achievements, including the Sac Actun-Dos Ojos connection, before Robbie provides what I can only describe as an unbelievably compelling view into his theories on how the caves of the Yucatan are formed. And then he tells us how he's using this information to inform his current exploration projects. Robbie has published a paper on his theories, and I'll include a link to this in the podcast notes. We also talk about the all-female Shunanha expedition before Robbie gives us his perspectives on the use of closed-circuit rebreathers in cave diving and his recent experiences training with Ed Sorensen and Patrick Woodman on the KISS Sidewinder. All this and much, much more on this episode of Speaking Sidemount. And we are recording. Robbie, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thank you, and giving me this opportunity to talk to you about it.
Thanks very much, mate. Given your standing in cave diving and exploration, I feel as though this interview is so overdue. And to be fair, you and I have been chatting for a few months trying to pull our schedules together. So awesome to meet you, awesome to have you on the show. And just some background for everyone. I mean, anyone who's into cave diving will, of course, know your name. But can you get us started by sharing a little bit about yourself?
Well, yeah, Robbie, that name did get around a little bit now, which is cool. Originally, I'm from Germany, came with only 23 years to Mexico to stay a little bit longer. Actually, I was there first in 21 to do a cave diving course, and that was when I got hooked to cave diving. And I couldn't get that caves of Mexico out of my head anymore. I had to think about them every day. So I decided to go to Mexico again when I was 23, and that was 98. Just to do like a half a year going somewhere else. I'm from a little hick town in Germany, so it was a big step for me. I was a lumberjack at the time. Big change to move to Mexico, and I only wanted to try for a half a year how it would be in a different country and not knowing the language, not knowing the people. The only thing I knew was cerveza and kept me alive. And the times were really different. 25 years ago, we started exploring right away, like going into the caves and find a lot of tunnels which just like the limestone cave obviously didn't. So even with very little experience, I started right away exploration and get into these new places where nobody had been before, full of stalactites, stalagmites, some archaeology, bones, and it's just breathtaking and crazy for a young guy of 23 years. And half a year went past very, very quickly. Then we had these big caves there, big systems, the Tuxcupasha cave and the Dos Pisos systems. We just started to explore those, and they're one of the most beautiful ones in the area. And I was supposed to go back to my lumberjack life, and I said, no way, no. So I called my boss. Say, hey, give that job to somebody else. I stay at least another half a year here. And so I did. And that half a year later, I had even more systems and more caves to explore. And guess what? Now it's 25 years later, and it's still the same. It's like going on with exploration and more caves to be found. The just doesn't stop. So I'm here now, 25 years already.
Amazing. And so many people get dragged into this thing of cave diving and cave exploration. I talk to a lot of my friends here, and the first words that come out of their mouths is, I could never do that. But once you've been diving for a while and you actually find yourself inside a cave, and of course you have the skill and experience to be able to deal with that, it is really, really mesmerizing, and it does draw you in, doesn't it?
It totally does. It takes you completely, swallows you whole, basically. When you get that exploration bug, you can't get away from it. It's like addiction, totally,
For sure.
Yeah, I'm still got the bug. I still have it.
Yeah, I guess that can happen in any pursuit. But I know early on when you were there, you met up with cave diving legend Bil Phillips on the Oxbow Harbour exploration. Tell us a bit about meeting Bill and how that contributed to your growth as an explorer.
Bill was my best friend in the area for sure. Bill was a character for sure too. All big explorers have a certain character, They have to be able to do this. I met Bill first when I was still working at Actun Dive Center, and Bill was working at Aquatech at the time in Vias de Rosa. He was there with a bunch of the another explorers which went down to Oshbelha, and they came in asking us if we could help with a portable compressor, taking it out to the jungle. And I was really happy that happened, and it was like going out with these legends to a new place and just helping carrying stuff out there. But I could actually learn from them how they were doing the jungle camp, setting up the gear, setting up the compressors, how they carried that, how they went on exploring, finding different places, hopping from cenote to cenote. I could learn so much, and that's also when I got to know Bill. And Bill and I, we grew together like really, really good friends. Like we were loving each other, we were fighting each other, we had a whole life together here in the Yucatan Peninsula. And it was just so sad that Bill, in the end, when we were just ready to connect Sac Actun and the Dos Ojos system, that he wasn't strong enough anymore and actually just passed away before the big connection happened. Till we found the holy grail of the area where people have been searching for many, many years.
Yeah, just amazing. And actually, I've got my list of questions here for you, and that's very much my next question. But along with that, I mean, who else was working with Bill at the time? There must have been some other names there that are incredibly prominent.
Well, when I met him, Bill was working, like I said, through Aquatech with the other guys working there. There was Christophe Lemaillot at the time, who's now leader of the GUI diving community in the area, together with Fred DeVos. Both of them were there. Sam Meacham was in the Oshbelha expedition. Yeah, that was the Oshbelha times. Later, this guy separate. Once went the GUI way, the other stayed on Side Mount, which GUI did do for long years, as we know. No? But
That's anyway, a whole other discussion, right?
It would be, yes, but let's not go there. Bill also went different ways. Him and I worked a lot together also with Steve Bogarts at the time. That was when we tried to make Sac Actun bigger and add different systems to it, which we did not only try, we did do actually. That was when we had Sac Actun and different places like Temple of Doom connected to it, Naval, Abejas Cave, and then finally the Nohoj-Nachich system, which for the first time made it biggest water-filled cave in the world. We worked all on that. Then Oshbelha became bigger again. Then we connected Actun-Hu to it, and Sac Actun became bigger again. And then Oshbelha came bigger again till the connection with Dos Ojos. And that made Sac Actun biggest water-filled cave in the world. And now I just read a report from the GUI divers that Oshbelha would be the largest water-filled cave in the world again. So I have to go back to work.
It's awesome. I know these sort of things don't happen by accident. There's a lot of blood, sweat and tears that are involved in pulling off a feat of connecting systems together and extending systems. Talk us through a bit of the work that went into connecting Sac Actun and Dos Ojos together.
Well, Sac Actun and Dos Ojos, that was a connection which was searched by many, many people for a long time. Even when I came here to the area, even if Sac Actun wasn't big yet, but the Nohoch-Nachich part and the Dos Ojos part, they were both very close, like a few meters only, or maybe 100-meter apart at the time. And it was the search for the holy grail of cave diving in this area here. And in the time when I came here, there was kind of a war going on in between two explorer groups, one led by Mike Madden, the other one led by Buddy Quattlebaum, and they tried to push the two different cave systems to become bigger and bigger, and at the moment of connection to have the biggest cave system, so they would stay with the name either Nohoch or Dos Ojos, whoever was winning the race there. But it didn't happen at all. They did not do the connection. It was many, many years later that we were able to do that. In 2008, Steve Bogarts and I came very close to make the connection there, and it was like 1.5 meters according to our survey data, which was missing. And we were going out for this really long dives, looking in each hole, and when it was so close to connect, we did a dive. We planned a dive going in from two different sides. Bogarts went in at the Dos Ojos side. I went in at the Nohoch-Nachich side. And we went to the same place where we assumed the connection will happen to see if we could see the light of a dive light through a crack, through a hole, or sediment which was brought up by movements inside the cave. And we could say, oh, there's some silt coming through, to get a clue where the connection would be. And none of that happened, but I was able to hear Steve on the other side of the wall. He was banging his tanks in a restriction against the wall, and it was like bang, bing, bing, and I did hear that, and I hold on to my tanks to make sure it's not me making that sound. And as I waited for like a couple of seconds, I can hear him again, bing, 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 on the other side of the wall. And that was the closest we get in 2008, and it took another 10 years of hard work to finally do the connection of the Nohoch part of Sac Actun to Dos Ojos in 2018.
Yeah, amazing. What I think a lot of people perhaps don't realize is that there's a lot of understanding of how these cave systems work that goes into exploration. And by that, I mean understanding how water works in limestone and how the caves are actually formed and created. I know that you have a very, very deep knowledge of this from my conversations with Ranva in particular. So talk a little bit about the thought process that goes into finding new leads and new connections and trying to understand how the cave goes so that you actually make these connections.
Well, the connections we did in the past was usually that I went into cave system, did the survey, then seeing the survey or the maps on the computer screen, the location of two different caves to each other. Sometimes it just seems to be really like obvious, especially if also water flow inside the cave goes from north to south, and then the next cave also sitting in line with that, and the water current or the movement of the water inside of it is also north to south, and there's only a little bit of a gap in between. Makes me think, okay, this cave should be connected somehow, especially because the cave below needs to be fed by something. The water needs to come from somewhere. It's not just coming out of the rock, running then through the cave. So sometimes it seems to be very obvious, and what we did in the time to try and connect different cave systems together in the Sac Actun system, some of the stuff was just obvious, but then others were like not so obvious. It's like we were always asking ourselves, why is that part of cave which runs, for the people which know the area, the Gran Cenote, Temple of Doom, Abejas caves, which is all kind of like straight towards the ocean cave profile, and then very close by the ocean at the Abejas system, it turns in 90 degrees and the water goes up along the coast, parallel to the Caribbean coast. Why is it doing that? But it did it, and then connected into the next system. So I guess water current, water flow is the best indicator for exploration and to find those connections. Now, in the last couple of years, I really do a lot of exploration with a different idea or a different meaning. In the past, I did the exploration just for the sake of it, like going out, finding a new cave, getting that feeling, oh, I'm the first person here. Never anyone has seen this before me. But in the last 5 years, I would say, or let's say a bit longer actually, last 15, 20 years, I'm trying to get as much information together as I can about those caves in this area here. So I collect cave data, which I produce myself, or when I go in a system which has been already explored but there's no data available, I go and resurvey it, talking to other explorers, asking to share information to create basically the big picture, to get as much information known of the area as possible, also scientific studies and so on and so on. The problem in many ways of exploration and science is that when people have their project, they don't share. They keep stuff very close to their chest. There's my precious, want to hide it away from people. But like that, we know really little of what could be known by now over the aquifer under the peninsula of Yucatan. So in the last 5 years, I'm trying actually to do exactly that. Get as much data, much information together on one big picture. And putting one big picture together, only the sight of it on the computer, on the screen, gives me a lot of new clues, a lot of new questions, and already a bit of a better understanding how the aquifer works. One really clear thing to see when you put as much data together on one picture as possible is that the cave systems we know so far, most of it is in between Puerto Aventuras, which is south of Playa del Carmen, and down south of Tulum, the little town of Muyil. And all cave systems run along the Caribbean coast, and inland there is like a straight cut line where there's no more horizontal cave development happening. And my question was, why? What is that? Why is there a straight line cutting the horizontal cave development under the peninsula? And there is still thousands of cenotes past that line, but now those cenotes are only, with a few little exceptions, all vertical shafts or sinkholes. And only on the east side of that clear cut towards the Caribbean coast there is horizontal cave development. So first question was, what is that cut? What does the development of cave stop back there? And I had heard about it earlier, like really in the beginning of my exploration days when I met Jim Koch for the first time. And we've been talking about that already in the days. And he said there is the Holbox fracture running from the island of Holbox, which gave it the name, all the way down to Belize. And it's a fracture which separates horizontal from vertical cave development. And I was the rookie at the time, and I said, but Jim, knowing how caves form by water seeping into the porous limestone and then searching away to the ocean, and it's just that usually where you have the way with the least resistance, which is inside a crack, inside a fracture, that should mean the Holbox fracture should be a water-bearing fracture cave. And if you say it goes from Holbox all the way to Belize, it should be a cave from Holbox all the way to Belize.
Yes.
And that was my logic with it. And Jim said, yeah, should be, but can you imagine? And laughed. And that was it. That was the end of this discussion at the time. But I have to say that's like 20 years back. But this thought never left my head. So I thought the Holbox fracture should be a water-bearing cave. And within the last 5 years, where I'm trying to understand better how the whole aquifer works, I'm looking actually for the fractures, for the Holbox fracture in the beginning. And I'm pretty sure I found it, and I'm pretty sure you've been diving part of the Holbox fracture already, which you just didn't know it was. For example, a part of the Holbox fracture, or which seems to be clearly part of the Holbox fracture, is the Chan Hol cave south of Tulum. If you see the map of Chan Hol, the main passage is straight line southwest northeast, and that is basically parallel the coastline. So that is one of them, and I looked for other areas where that could be the case, where the main passage would be having this direction. I found them. Found it in several places. For example, in the Camilo system, which is better known for the Cenote Muchachos. There's some really good evidence of that part of cave development. Another very good indicator in there is the flow of the water is actually picking up. That's one. It's like what we really know a lot. Caves very close by the ocean, you have a noticeable flow in there. Then you go more inland, the flow gets less and less and less. And then farther out, when you get to the Holbox fracture, it picks up again. Another indicator. But the main and best indicator to say, okay, now I'm in the Holbox fracture and not anymore in a cave which lays in between, is actually the change of flow. The change of flow is happening that the water runs parallel to the coastline in the fracture. So it is actually going parallel to the coast. And what was really surprising at that moment was to see that the water actually not going from Holbox or from the north to the south. It's actually the other way around. The water comes from southwest and goes northeast. I found that in several different caves. And it's all the same pattern, all the same picture, which leads me to the belief all the water which is here in the area comes from the center of the peninsula and from the southwest, from Belize and Guatemala, which also makes a hell lot more sense if you look at the map. Up there at the Holbox area or Cancun area, it's just surrounded by ocean, by salt water, by the Caribbean Sea and the Gulf of Mexico. And there's no mountains or anything which could hold massive amounts of fresh water back. So it does make a lot of sense that the water is actually coming from the south, from the southwest. You know?
Yeah, basically coming from altitude there, right?
That's one, but it's a long time till you get altitude, and no significant altitude neither. But what is down there, there's a way bigger landmass. No, there's all this area, the Yucatan, the mainland of Belize and Guatemala, and a lot of rainwater can seep down in this area. And it is actually even shown in other articles that there is one big aquifer under the peninsula, which is spreading out of about 165,000 square kilometers. That's a lot of water. Now, the other question that wasn't figured out yet, but what I describe in an article which I just wrote and was actually, double-checked.
Edited and fact-checked.
Yes, by the university, the Technical University of Mexico. They published that in a science magazine then for me. And there I'm describing why that is happening. Why is the water coming from inland, first to the Caribbean coast, and then being turned around and channeled up along the coast towards the tip of the peninsula, and only there disappears into the ocean. And in my theory, that is actually the water movement of the Caribbean Sea, the main currents in the Caribbean Sea. If you look at the map, the main currents coming through the Caribbean islands and the mainland of Mexico, it's this really, really wide channel, and a huge water mass has to go through this corridor or channel. Really, really deep water also in between Mexico and the Caribbean islands. But then all that water mass has to go through a restriction up in between Cuba and the tip of the Yucatan Peninsula. So we know that very well as cave divers. When we go through a restriction, what happens? Pressure really, really rises, not only in our heads, but also the water pressure. And all that water has to go through that small area at the same time. Pressure and current and speed of water really, really speeds up. And that is happening in the Yucatan Channel right there, because all that water has to go through there into the Gulf of Mexico. In the Gulf of Mexico, that's like a huge bay, isn't it? All around the states in Mexico. There's no outlet. Only underneath Florida and on the top of Cuba, there is the Florida Straits. And that's where the water again has to disappear through a restriction. So what is happening in the Gulf of Mexico, there's actually this vortex kind of thing happening and then blowing it out through the Straits of Mexico. So what's happening is there's currents right there at those restrictions of about 100 or up to 120 nautical miles. It's crazy, strong, ripping current in that area. And that is happening right there where a Holbox fracture and Acuma fracture, a fracture which was not known so far, but I described the existence of it in my article, right by Cancun, where it's open and going out, and there water gets pulled out by those ripping currents of the Caribbean coast.
I can describe that in engineering terms too, because I'm a mechanical engineer, and there's actually a thing called a Venturi pump.
It's an XXXL Venturi, in fact, sucking out fresh water of the peninsula. If you're interested in that stuff, guys out there, read that article.
Where will that article be available?
It was printed in the Avascient Science magazine. It's in Spanish there. I made a link where you can read it in English out of Dropbox. We can put that link somewhere.
That'd be awesome, and we can put that in the podcast notes and on the Facebook page for Speaking Sidemount. That'd be amazing. I'd love to read that. Okay, please carry on. That was brilliant.
Well, that's a theory, and I could go on and on. But looking into this, like how the water movements of the peninsula or under the peninsula might work, I found out a lot of other stuff. There is more principal fractures crisscrossing the whole peninsula. Some I had heard about, like the Anillo de los Cenotes, or the Ring of Cenotes, up on the northern tip of the peninsula by Merida in the Gulf, which is proved to be the impact crater of the meteor which hit about 66 million years ago and supposedly killed all the dinosaurs. So that big impact made a circular fracture zone, which is the Ring of Cenotes, and there's a lot of cenotes right around that ring. Half of that fracture is sitting under the shallow waters of the Gulf of Mexico, but the other half is inland, and you have all these cenotes around it. But also, when you take a big sledgehammer and hit a rock, you might have this, or you will have this round impact right there, but what will happen on a rock? It also goes... And there's one fracture running away from Ring of Cenotes, which I never had heard before till I looked more into this geology of the peninsula, called the Sierrita de Ticul fracture. And that fracture actually goes in a 90-degree angle away from Ring of Cenotes, crosses completely through the peninsula, and most likely interconnects with two other fracture zones down south of the peninsula in Bacalar area, more or less, which is the Rio Hondo fracture and the Holbox fracture we've been talking about already. That could mean that all these major fractures, all of them are interconnected underground here, and they could move water over hundreds of kilometers, like normal rivers or rivers we know in other countries which are topside do. One river goes into the next, they join, and they take a turn, and they go somewhere else, and they join with another river and another, and then at some point they end up in the ocean. And the same thing, I believe, is happening on the peninsula of Yucatan, but underground. No? So that's what I believe. The big fractures interconnect and drain water through the ground of the peninsula, and some of them are water-filled caves at all times, like the Holbox fracture or the Rio Hondo fracture. Other fractures, like the Sierrita de Ticul, might be a dry cave some part of the year, but when then there's raining happening, big floodings happening in areas, it channels water like the caves we have along the coast, bring it to the Caribbean coast, and then up north to the Venturi effect there, letting that water out. Another thing with that is also explaining the 2,000 kilometers of caves barely or around there, which is known in the Playa del Carmen, Tulum area. No one had till now explained why those caves are there. How they form, yes, like water seeping into the ground, dissolving the limestone, searching its way where it can escape to the ocean, and using little fractures to do that, wash them out, building a tunnel. Why so much? Why so much in that area, Tulum, Playa del Carmen? With this big picture and the article I've been writing, it seems just logical why that would be the way. Because the fracture, the Holbox fracture, moving a lot of water up towards the Cancun area or tip of the peninsula, becomes very, very close to the ocean, to the Caribbean Sea. It's just a strip of maybe 12 to 13 kilometers of limestone separating the Caribbean Ocean from the Holbox fracture. So with all the sucking force of the Caribbean Sea running from southwest to northeast up that way, plus the pressure of water movement inside the fracture, like the pressure wants to go out and the ocean suction wants to pull it out. So it's two forces which work together there, making that river delta of caves we have along the coast here by searching its way out to the ocean. So part of it still moving up northeast and part of it escapes to cracks and holes and which have been formed cave systems already by millions of years of cave building right now. So we have all these ocean outlets along the coast. There's some down in the Oshpilha system. There is some more famous ones like Casa Cenote or Shelha, which is a tourist attraction. Then Yalku, all up along the coast, there is some windows or some outlets to the ocean. Now, what was interesting also to see is that many caves went like straight towards the ocean, but then turned shortly before they got there by 90 degrees and run up for kilometers along the coastline. For example, all that water coming from Sac Actun or Gran Cenote, classic Sac Actun, Gran Cenote, Temple of Doom, Abejas. It goes straight towards the ocean and very, very close to it. It turns 90 degrees, goes up and discharges in Casa Cenote. Why did it do that? No? Why? That was always a question we had. But then, looking more into this, also realized there's another fracture there. The Abejas cave, it's clearly to see fracture cave. Then you go up to Akumal and there's a cave called, oh my God, what is it called? I don't remember right now, but it's a Mayan name, so it's a little hard. But there is so evident that it is a crack, that it was split open. You can tell, okay, this wall used to be together with that wall there, and it's a crack which goes down to 60 meters of depth. It's a pure, clear fracture, and if you look at the map of it, it is 5 kilometers, just like an arrow-shaped line, straight. So that could not be water corroding its ways through the limestone. No, it had to open differently, and that was a fracture and a crack. Diving that cave gave me the idea, okay, there must be another fracture. And then I looked again for more evidence in different areas and again found that evidence of a fracture going up that direction, very, very close to the coastline. And because it's so evident in Akumal, I called it the Akumal fracture. That fracture was not known to anyone yet, to any scientist has ever mentioned it, but the evidence of it is just so clear to see. And I described that also in my article. I think it does separate a little bit south of Tulum from Holbox fracture, like splitting away from it, and then they go kind of parallel next to each other, opening wider and wider as they go up the coast.
Amazing. And you don't need to be a rocket scientist now or even a scientist of any description to understand how this information is now contributing to future exploration projects in terms of having a deeper knowledge of what's going on. So where are you taking this information now? Because obviously this is going to point you in literally thousands of different directions in terms of the projects that you want to work on. How is this contributing to what you're doing now?
Well, since a couple of years, like since the pandemic, which is now, 3 years already, the lockdown?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah, I was sitting here in my place, had like the hotel locked down, had the dive shop locked down. And I did that for 22 years, the shop and the hotel. And I was sitting here and there was nobody here. I was just with the family and put the barbie on and some beers. And it's like, that's life. That's what I want.
It wasn't all that terrible, was it? There were some big benefits to come from it, especially the first one.
Yeah, and I was able to go out and explore, and I said, that's what I want to do. So not going to open a dive shop anymore, not going to open a hotel anymore, and concentrate now only on exploration. And so I do, and I love it. I really want to keep going with it. But also with the theory I'm explaining about the major fractures, the water movement, the ocean current pulling it. It took me a couple of years to put that all together and then to get to a point where I'm so certain about this that I can actually go to public with this, make an article about it and all of that. So I'm working a couple of years on that theory, and now all the expeditions coming, all the explorations coming, are basically to get more weight to that theory or prove it, that it is like that, or maybe unprove some of the ideas I have and find out, oh no, it's different. No? So that's exactly where it's leading, and that's leading me now with my expeditions all over the peninsula, because the fractures are all over the peninsula. So a logical thing right now is to find those principal fractures, find the evidence that they exist, find proof that, for example, Sierrita de Ticul most of the time is dry cave, but then when big rainings are happening or hurricanes, that they become a drainage system like other caves. So that's all expeditions and knowledge I need to find now and prove for it, because you can imagine when you come up with a theory and say it is like that, that there's also people out there who say, no, you're full of shit. And that happened,
well, that's science too, isn't it? And I loved what you said before about going out there, gathering more evidence, and then either proving or disproving the hypothesis or theory that you have. I mean, that's science. And also being open to peer review and critique is part of it. It might not be fun, but having others review your work and say, yeah, that makes sense, and then where's more evidence? I'm an engineer by background. I understand science, and so I think 100% on the right track there in terms of where you're looking to take this. And it's very exciting, I think, for cave exploration.
Yeah, absolutely. And the other thing is it's absolutely needed, because what is going on here, it's not just that it's super interesting, at least for people which are interested in how things work and nature and conserving nature. It's super, super important because the aquifer in this area here is daily more and more polluted. Really terrible here in the area, in like let's say the Riviera Maya, what's going on with buildings, with train projects, with new airports, with cities growing like cancers. It's not cool. The last years, it's really, really alarming. And places, for example, Temple of Doom, you've been there for sure. You can't dive them anymore. They're so polluted that you can't dive them anymore without risking your health. And I've been diving under Tulum and been sick for 4 times, where I had always bacteria infection in my throat. It's just getting more and more like that. And unfortunately, there is not enough from the government, very, very little interest to protect this aquifer. But it's needed because this aquifer interconnects all different ecosystems. And that is the jungle in the area, the mangrove forest, savanna, and even the ocean, the coral reef, the second largest coral reef in the world, barrier reef in the world, is just right out here, and it's dying, no? And it's really, really hard to find protection for this because you can't see it. It's not a fluffy panda bear, you know? So, hey, look how cute that is. We need to protect that. And even that doesn't work. We're just terrible, we humans. What is happening is these river systems, underground river systems here, they're working like a vein system in our body. So you inject something to your arm, it doesn't stay there. It travels through all your body and pollutes everything. And that's what's happening here. So with this expeditions and understanding of the aquifer, or trying to understand it and make proof of different things, I want to prove or show, look, guys, this is happening. This is what's happening. If you pollute here in Tulum, that travels up the coast, that goes up to the next town, to Akumal. And if you pollute in Akumal, that travels up to Puerto-Venturas. And if you pollute in Puerto-Venturas, it travels up to Playa del Carmen and then Playa to Cancun. It's not staying where it is at that point in this area. It's all spreading around. And finally, it's going to end up in the ocean, where it kills the coral reef. And you can have so many different projects in planting coral reef, planting new corals and stuff like that. But it will die again because you don't stop pollution coming in, no? So have to prove all that, make an awareness of that, and at some point, hopefully, find protection for the whole aquifer, because all life of the peninsula, if it's plants, animals, or humans, depend on a clean aquifer. Even economy of the peninsula, because the peninsula has only one income, and that's tourism, nothing else. There's no industry, there's no agriculture possible in that area. So every income depends also on a clean and healthy aquifer. And I'm trying to prove that, trying to show that, trying to make people understand to make changes and protect the water of the area.
Yeah, and I've had this on Speaking Side Mount before. We've done episodes on Somos Los Cenotes, and I've had discussions on the Tren Maya project. One thing that I've noticed with the work that you're doing too is the increase, obviously, with technology and cameras and lights and so on, of using video to show what's underground. First saw, I think, your videos on the Vanilla Sky project with our mate Toddy, Thorsten Velder, which was just stunning to be able to see what you guys were doing. And I think for a lot of people, they don't really understand. Under the ground is out of sight. Under the water is out of sight. Often the pollution going in there, they're getting it away from what is in sight to somewhere that isn't. And that's part of the problem, is helping understand exactly what is under there. You talked about helping people do exactly that. How do you think we can get the message out further through things like Somos Los Cenotes, the opposition to Tren Maya, using media such as video or social media or so on? How do you think that's going to progress from the research that you're doing now?
I think we just have to do more of that. No, Somos Los Cenotes is great because it does show how it is down there. It's not only for a few of us which be able to actually go and dive in there and see it for ourselves. It also shows the rest of people which cannot or not able to dive into these caves, how that looks like down there. And as more we do of this kind of stuff, as more we bring out, as more visible we make it, I think as better it will be to find awareness for this place. And also what I'm trying to do with getting more technology involved is to get more people interested. What we're going to do right now, we're going to try and find the caves from the air, from the ground and underground. So bringing technology in, like the GBA, which would translate to the Federal Institution of Geology of Austria. That's some guys which are leaders, aerogeophysics. They've been working in the area here for many years, I think 12 or 15 years already. They've been flying over with helicopters, sending electromagnetic waves into the ground and receive them back up again. And by that, they can make maps which show different density of what the waves go through and be received again. So solid rock is one density. A rock with a hole in it has a different density. The hole is filled with fresh water, does have a different density. Then it would be with salt water and so on. So these flight lines put next to each other gives a colorful map of density of the ground. And if you have like this snake-shaped green or blue in it, might be a cave, which we then also can double check by going in and diving that. No? So finding caves needs to be accelerated in the area to get the understanding of the aquifer accelerated and to get more information out and make more people interested in it. When somebody is maybe not so much interested in the cave diving, but hey, they find caves with drones and electromagnetic stuff, and they make it more interested for more people. And that's one thing we want to do. Acceleration of the exploration project and the understanding to get out more information and get more people interested and get, hopefully, faster protection for the place.
It's a super interesting comment you made there. So in the past, a lot of explorers have kept things to themselves. You mentioned that earlier, so that they are the ones who are responsible for exploring systems. And now you're turning that around and saying there's an absolute need to expand exploration. And one thing I saw you do, I mean, I've had a lot of women on this podcast who are involved in the Shunan Ha expedition project with you, and which was supposed to start a few years ago and got held up by the pandemic, but did kick off in November 21. And I've had Tamara May and Ramba Jurmanson on, and also I've met Maria Bollerup and Julia Gugelmeyer, who are definitely on my list to have on the show, by the way. But I just thought this was a stunning project. It was an all-women project, which is interesting in itself. But I know a lot of it was about mentoring and about supporting them to understand exploration and to progress their own careers as cave divers and cave explorers. And there was also some brilliant video from it too. So can you share a bit about that project and what the thinking was behind it, and then how that project progressed?
Well, one thing is it was part already of the what I've been explaining right before, like searching for the different fractures. So we were looking if whole bush fracture crosses in that area there, which we kind of proved, but the arms where we've been exploring, they run away from it. But it's fine because they connected onto it too. So that was one part to extend the knowledge of where do the caves go, how's the fracture, the whole bush fracture affecting that area specifically where we've been exploring. But then again, also, there is a lot of female divers in cave diving here, which are just as good as male divers, you know. But what never had been done before, like an expedition project with only women, you know. And yeah, if it would be a lot of guys with beer bellies and in their 40s and big beards, that's what we know, right? That's the expeditions which have been happening in the past. But let's make it different, no? And it was, I think, great. For me, it was a great experience just to work only with women in an expedition camp. And I think for them it was great because we took that a bit away of like only the big men, like the silverback cave divers can do this. No, not true. No?
Yes.
It was a great project. I enjoyed a lot. And it made it also more interesting, you know. You asking me before it because it was all women. No? It raised awareness. It made it more interesting. And that's exactly what we need to do. We need to get the word out and make it more interesting, not just the same again.
Yeah, it's eye-catching, isn't it? Because it is different and that will always capture your attention. And I think part of it, yes, they're women, but also these are exceptional women, in my opinion, as well. I mean, meeting Ranva and Maria and Julia and Tamara, I mean, they're very, very good divers, yes, great human beings and awesome to be around. They've got a real infectious spirit about them, which I think people involved in cave diving, cave exploration tend to have anyhow. And then listening to Ranva describe her and Maria making their very first connection as part of that project. You know, it's in the episode. I'll put it in the notes again, which one it was. I can't remember now. But it was just amazing. And then to see them form Nixie Expeditions and go on to their next project that they're going to run with my good mate Robin Questa and Sulawesi, Expedition Booting, that's going to be called. And just to see, again, the things that they're doing that are a little bit different, using social media to promote their expedition in advance of them even going, which for them is terrifying, I know, because they haven't found anything yet. So they're setting themselves up a bit, I think, in their opinion.
How do you put pressure on themselves?
Exactly. But even going through the process of setting this expedition up and going and doing it and giving everyone exposure to or a view of what that looks like is amazing. I mean, yesterday they laid out all their equipment, and we're going to get onto that in a moment too, because they're diving the KISS Sidewinder, which I want to talk to you about also. But I just think you mentoring them into this process and then seeing them take that further, I think is an amazing achievement for you and for them, and compliment all of you involved in that project for that reason, because I think it's been extremely positive, and it's only going to encourage more women cave divers to become involved in expeditions and exploration. And also, look, it's motivating for the rest of us as well, because you can see what's going on and you want to be a part of it. I'm a little bit old in the tooth for it now, so I'm just coming along to share the ride and see what you guys find. But I think it's awesome to see that. And again, congratulations.
No, it was a great team. And just to be fair, you named everybody except of Ellen. Ellen was there too, Ellen Couillards, and Melody, of course.
So Melody and Ellen, yes, 100%. We'll add them to the list. Let's carry on. Let's kick on a little bit more. We're well into this now. And thank you so much for sharing on all of that. It was amazing to listen to what you've learned and the experiences that you've had and how you're contributing to the science of cave exploration. But I want to ask you a little bit about the KISS Sidewinder, because you're now a newly minted KISS Sidewinder diver. And I've been effusing about this amazing unit for the last 3.5 years since I did my training with Ed. So tell us a bit about your thoughts previous to doing your Sidewinder training and how you're thinking about the Sidewinder now.
Well, my previous thoughts of rebreather diving in general was never. Not going to do it ever. This is machines, they kill people all the time. And one thing is, I was afraid because I thought I saw people diving in rebreathers, and the ones which survived, they were like these nerdy guys, you know, like really like into their gear, cleaning it right after the dive for an hour. Before the next dive, they prepare it for an hour and everything has to be marvelous. I'm not like that. I'm a mess, you know. I take my gear, throw it in the box, and then I take it again for the next dive, and then throw it in the box again, and say, oh, I forgot to charge my light. And I use it again, now we'll be fine. And then it starts bubbling, and said, oh, the bubbles are not bad yet. I can still use it for a while. I'm that kind of person. Huh?
That's an open circuit mentality for sure.
Yeah. So I was afraid that fuck, if I dive that way with the rebreather, I'd be dead in a half a year. No? And I thought rebreather and me doesn't fit together, I think. No? Plus, as I've been exploring mainly in the caves in the area here and been mainly chasing the connections in between what was around Sac Actun, it was always like depth. Well, if you got to 20 meters at a point, it was rare. No? So fine with side mount, and I said, whatever they can do with their rebreathers, I can do in open circuit too. No? Well, then I've been exploring down in Belize, in the islands of Belize and the Keys, and there we had like 9 caves. We pushed that to the limit what was able to do with open circuit. No? The limits were really quickly found because these caves down there were all 30 meters of depth. So even with a stage or 2, you had immense time pressure to push the exploration, and then coming back with huge amounts of decompression is like, oh my God, this is not cool. And there I could actually really first time see, wow, there is a place where you have a need for a rebreather. And then I was first time like really thinking, should I learn how to rebreather dive? Should I try to work on myself to actually not be that bad in equipment maintenance and stuff like that? So I thought about it at that time, and then I had almost accident here at my dive shop with a rebreather diver at the same time. Something like very stupid. He went down and the controller was not turned on, and because he was just believing it will turn on with the water pressure itself, right? Didn't breathe 2 times the loop and passed out and almost drowned. It was a miracle that the guy survived. They reanimated him in Mayan Blue cenote. There was an ambulance parked at the Mayan Blue parking lot. How likely is that?
Oh my God. Wow.
They were there in 2 minutes. And they're like, what? No? That's so not Mexico, and so not Tulum. It was a miracle. And then they brought him to the hospital in Tulum, tried to get some hoses down his lung, like for making breathe, right? Couldn't do that. So they brought him to Playa del Carmen. We didn't know how long his brain was without oxygen and stuff. 2 days later, they put him into artificial coma, and we visited him there in the hospital. And then we didn't know if he wakes up and when, how will he be? And he woke up and he was just like, straight on. He's like, what happened? Asked with the tubes in his mouth, question mark, was my O2 turned off? And we said, oh my God, he even remembers what's going on. But still, that experience really turned me completely off the rebreathers.
I get it.
Because I thought, this is something which could totally happen to me because I'm that person. Like, oh yeah, I don't know how many times I went side mount diving, changing to my other regulator, and it was closed. And it's like, oh, why doesn't it give me air? Right? Not a problem. Turn it back on, and
yes,
you find in OC, but that's not how you can dive with the rebreathers. So I thought, okay, this is not for me. Plus, I did a test dive with an old Inspiration once, and then a test dive with an SF2, and I wasn't happy. I wasn't happy with any of that. And it's like, this is way too complicated, and if I go up, I cannot breathe, or I go down, I cannot breathe. What's the point of that? So I thought, okay, no, rebreather not for me. But now I've been exploring with Philip Lehmann and with Skander Kopil.
Yes.
And they're both on the machine. They're both on the Sidewinder. And I ended up sitting for hours in the jungle or on the top of a boat coming out of the cave. And they had another 3-4 hours fun, you know?
Yeah.
It's like, getting eaten by tabanos up on top and waiting for them to come out. And then also waiting outside is always the worst part. It's like with your head start going on, like you think everything is fine. They're a long time gone now. You know, it's like, I never got used to that. And the whole time I've been diving caves. But anyway, so I'm sitting outside getting eaten by tabano, and this guy's go and explore caves down there. And then next dive, I'm not even able to get the end of the lines. I said, no way. This is not possible. I usually be one of the strongest members in an expedition group in the past to push the ends of the lines, and now I couldn't get to the ends of their lines. I said, no way. This is not happening. So I looked into that Sidewinder unit and in the training and everything, and it's just great. It's an amazing unit. It's just clip it onto your harness. You just dive it. It's not like the others where you have to balance everything to the centimeter. It's like perfect. No, I think. And then the advantage of it, how long you can stay there, all the possibilities you have if something goes wrong, how you can fix it or bail out and go home when you still have 2 complete side mount cylinders and so on and so on. It's also really completely convincing. No, it's an amazing machine. I was so lucky to get that sponsored by XD, Brotag, Patrick Whitman. He gave me his unit and learned me how to use it, which I'm very, very grateful for. I'm just going to put a couple of more hours now on and the cave training with it, and then I will use it in expeditions, explorations, find more of this amazing cave system there.
And I can only imagine what Philip and Skander for that matter, but certainly Philip was saying to you at the time when you were sitting out as well, because he's incredibly effusive himself and very convincing in his arguments around why it's such a great unit.
I got all that lecture.
I bet you did. I bet you did. Yeah. And you trained with Ed and with Patrick because Ed was in Mexico at the time. I mean, how was that experience? Did anything surprise you about what you learned?
I think they thought I'm a really, really bad student or something like that because I had 3 ITs in my course. It was Patrick Whitman, Ed Sorensen, which helped in the development of the unit and test dived it and everything. And like, I don't know if there's another person has as much experience on that unit as him.
There is not, no.
Johnny from Mergulho Técnico from Brazil, good friend of mine. There are 3 of them ITs on the machine, so I don't know if that was good or bad to learn with these guys. But it was a lot of fun for sure.
If it's any consolation, I trained with 2 of the 3, so I did my Mod 1 with Ed and then went to Patrick for my Mod 2 60-meter Moxic Trimax course. And listen, I mean, you're surrounded by 2 of the very best there and they're great guys as well and very different people, which, again, I enjoy that in terms of just the humans they are. And Ed was amazing to train with. I just had so much fun at the same time as, he's hard on you, but it was really, really good stuff. And again, training with Patrick after that, there's a contrast, but thoroughly enjoyed both of those experiences and highly recommended. And again, I think the Sidewinder in terms of exploration, I mean, this whole thing about, yes, you can dive deeper and you can dive longer, but Ed has a saying, which I've repeated many times, this gas stress, distance stress, and time stress all goes away. And I've recounted, I was in Mexico in November doing my training with Patrick, and then we did a dive in Nohoch after that. As you well know, the average depth of that dive was about 6 meters. And again, no trouble maintaining my buoyancy in 2 meters, 5 meters, 6 meters. So that was amazing. Dived monkey dust and had to bail out because a little bit like you were saying earlier, you got to pay attention to your checks. My computer battery was fine in terms of the little battery indicator, but I hadn't checked the voltage and my computer failed about 40 minutes into the dive. And so, yes, just bailed out to side mount 2 11-litre cylinders or 80 cubic foot cylinders to exit the cave. Funnily enough, I said to the guide I was with, I'm quite happy to carry on with the dive and side mount if you're happy, because that's exactly what you are. You're a side mount open circuit diver at that point with still all of the gas that I would have had if I'd entered the water that way. In the end, we turned it because we were a bit worried about what the incident report might have been if we'd had a problem after I'd bailed out and then decided to carry on with a dive. But the truth of the matter is you're just in side mount, right?
Yeah,
it's just
exactly,
as if
no problem. Yeah.
So just for me, an amazing thing. So the exploration projects that you've got coming up, how do you see the Sidewinder contributing? And when do you think you're going to use it? Are you going to be like Philip and Skander and dive it all of the time? Or is it just going to be a tool that you use when you need to use it?
Actually, we went to an area now where we have a need of it, really, because the caves are deeper. They are like in between 15 to 30 meters, and it is absolutely a need. Well, if I want to do full-on exploration like the others, be a part of like a full counting part of the expedition, yes, I do need to use it. And not only that, I want to use it. It's amazing. It's like, I'm kind of an experienced side mount diver, but diving with next to them and see there's no time pressure whatsoever, diving differently. I mean, I was rushing in. They were coming in behind me, and I was looking, why they're not that far back, like I just go. But then rushing in to do my work, then have to turn around and then see them again, and they have that grin in their face and go like, ciao. It's like,
yeah, see you later.
I can't do that. No, it's so much more effective. I was saying always what can be done with the rebreather in these caves here in the area, I can do also in open circuit, but side mount. And in the worst case, I have to do 2 dives where they do 1, but it's not true. It's not true. It's way more efficient, especially when it comes to those depths of 15 to 30 meters. There's no comparison, actually. No. One thing I learned on my old days of exploration, yes, I will use the rebreather. I can be more efficient with it. And another thing I learned from both of these guys, from Philip and Skander, using the M-Nemo measurement, the cave measurement little thing from Sebastian, I'm never gonna do the old way again. Like compass blade and trying to read the number, my eyes don't get better, you know. Yeah, that's 2 things I'm really changed now from what I did going to the Sidewinder and using the M-Nemo. It is more efficient exploration for sure, no question.
Brilliant. Well, it's a great point to end on. And mate, I can't wait to see what you guys do now that you're able to extend that, and now that you've told me a bit about the science and what you're learning about the cave systems and how it's contributing to exploration. So I'd love to get you back on the show sometime, maybe in a few months or a year or so, and hear how you've been doing that. Thanks so much for sharing. I mean, I think you've given us a perspective of the caves of Mexico that we've never had before. And while you've been talking, I've been running over in my head how I'm going to title this particular episode. So I'll think of something that encapsulates that exploration and knowledge of the cave systems of Mexico that's contributing to your exploration projects. And again, thank you for sharing with us and your time. And I know it took a bit to put this one together, but we got there. So thank you so much. And hopefully when I'm back in Mexico, I'm thinking I might be back not next year, but the year after. So maybe we can meet up. And Skander owes me a dive, so maybe I can join in on one of the dives.
Yeah, absolutely. Anytime.
Thank you, mate. We'll catch you soon.
See you soon.
Hey, thanks so much for listening. I hope you got as much out of this episode as I did. I thought it was absolutely brilliant to hear Robbie's descriptions on his theories on how the caves of Yucatan are formed and how he's using this information to inform his cave exploration projects. It was also interesting to hear Robbie's perspective on closed-circuit rebreathers, and in particular the fact that he didn't think that rebreathers were for him, but ultimately found that the Sidewinder was a great fit with his diving and also how it's going to support his cave exploration. I want to take a special moment to thank X-Deep for their support of this show. It's no understatement to say without their support I would not be able to continue with the podcast, and I'm so grateful for their continuing support of Speaking Sidemount. I also want to acknowledge the patrons of Speaking Sidemount, the people that each month contribute to this show and help me make this possible. Now this month I want to acknowledge our gold patrons, and in particular mention them by name because their support really does help me bring this together. First of all, Alessandra Figari. Of course you will know her by name. She was my guest in episode 77. Andrew Hunter, who's been with me along with Brendan Allen right from the very beginning. Our new gold patron, Danny Fryer from Western Australia. Jason Bingham. Justin Ensman, who also is featured on the show. Kay Evans, one of my students. I so appreciate her support. Martin Pulazotto, Matthew Burden, who's also been a guest on the show, Mohammed Hassam, and I've only got Roscoe here as your name, Roscoe, but I really appreciate you supporting the show. Again, thank you to all of my gold patrons, and yes, thank you to all of the other patrons who support the show and gain early access to all of the episodes. It's a massive support, and I really appreciate it. Thanks to all of you too for listening, and I'll catch you in the next episode. You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.